What if I told you there was an engine so powerful, so loud, so raw, they had to ban it? The Detroit Diesel 8V92 wasn't just an engine, it was a legend. It hauled America for decades, then vanished. Why? What really happened? Stick around, because the truth behind its disappearance might just blow your mind. What was the Detroit 8V92? A two-stroke beast unleashed. Let's break it down. The 8V92 stands for 8 cylinders in a V-block configuration, with each cylinder displacing 92 cubic inches. That adds up to a whopping 736 cubic inches of diesel muscle. But here's the kicker. It wasn't a 4-stroke like most modern engines. Nope, this was a 2-stroke diesel, which means every downward movement of the piston produced power. It was constantly working, constantly growling. This wasn't just an engine, it was a war cry. Introduced in the 1970s, the 8V92 was part of the Detroit Diesel Series 92 family, and it quickly became a favorite for fleets across America. Trucks, buses, fire engines, military vehicles, you name it, this engine pulled it. It could produce over 500 horsepower in high-performance configurations and up to 1,450 pound-feet of torque, depending on the turbo and fuel settings. And it had a very specific, very unforgettable voice. That high-pitched scream, that came from its root-style blower in the rapid-fire firing order of the two-stroke cycle. You could hear an 8V92 coming from miles away, and people loved it. For gearheads, it was music. For truckers, it was confidence. For everyone else, it was a heads up to get out of the way. It wasn't just the noise, it was the feeling. The 8V92 gave you that raw, unfiltered diesel experience. No digital trickery, no filters, just metal, combustion, and roar. This engine was the mechanical version of a middle finger to regulations. And for a while, it worked beautifully. Why fleets loved it? Torque, reliability, and simplicity. The 8V92 didn't just sound good, it worked. That's why fleet owners kept coming back to it year after year. First off, let's talk torque. The kind of torque that moved mountains, or at least fully loaded semis up steep grades without breaking a sweat. In the real world, torque matters more than horsepower. You don't need speed, you need pulling power. And the 8V92 delivered it in spades. But that wasn't the only reason people loved it. It was simple. These engines were designed for real-world mechanics, the kind with grease on their hands and decades of experience under their belts. You didn't need a laptop to diagnose it. You didn't need to mess with computer codes. If something went wrong, you could usually fix it on the side of the road with the right tools and a little know-how. And then there was parts availability. Because Detroit diesel was so widely used, you could find parts everywhere. From junkyards to dealerships, keeping one of these things alive wasn't hard. Mechanics often joked, "You'll give up before the engine does." It was also modular. You could swap in turbos, blowers, injectors. You could build the engine for power, efficiency, or even a bit of both. And perhaps, most importantly, these engines were tested. In the heat, in the cold, in the rain, under stress, under load. They kept going. Whether it was a cross-country freight haul or a fire truck idling for hours at a scene, the 8V92 earned its reputation. But just as it was reaching the height of its fame, the game started to change. The turning point: emissions, noise, and the EPA crackdown. Here's where things start to go downhill, for the engine anyway. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, emission standards started tightening. The Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, was cracking down on soot, NOx emissions, and smoke-belching diesels that blacken the sky. And guess what? The 8V92 was not subtle. These engines were notorious for spitting out black smoke under heavy load, especially if they weren't tuned properly. They were loud, they were dirty, and they made no effort to hide it. To be fair, Detroit Diesel tried. They introduced Silver Series variants, added turbochargers, and tweaked fuel systems. They even offered some low-emission versions, like the DDEC, Detroit Diesel Electronic Controls, variants which included electronic fuel timing and better injectors. But it wasn't enough. The two-stroke design, while powerful, was inherently dirty. It burned oil. It couldn't match the cleanliness of emerging four-stroke engines. And the noise? Let's just say, residential neighborhoods and transit authorities weren't thrilled about buses screaming like fighter jets. By the mid-1990s, it was clear the 8V92's days were numbered. Regulations were tightening and cleaner. Quieter engines were taking over the market. Ironically, the very things that made the 8V92 legendary, its sound, its smoke, its unfiltered power, became the reasons it was banned from newer fleets. Fleet buyers had to choose, risk fines and inspections, or upgrade to something cleaner. Most chose the latter, and just like that, the legend was getting pushed out, not by failure, but by politics. The industry shift, computerized engines take over. By the late 1990s, a new breed of diesel engine was taking over the highways, computer-controlled, high-pressure, clean-burning four-strokes. Caterpillar, Cummins, and even Detroit Diesel themselves began phasing out old-school designs. These new engines didn't scream. They hummed. They whispered. They delivered power efficiently, not dramatically. For trucking companies, it made sense. Fuel economy was improving. Emissions were lower. Noise complaints dropped. Government inspections became less of a headache. But for gearheads, for old-school truckers, it was the beginning of the end. The 8V92 wasn't just being retired, it was being replaced by engines that lacked soul. Ones you couldn't fix with a wrench and a flashlight. Ones that needed diagnostic computers, dealer-only software, and expensive service calls. And let's be real, those early electronic systems were glitchy. Many mechanics hated working on them, but it didn't matter. Regulations ruled the road now. Detroit Diesel officially discontinued the 8V92 in 1995, after nearly 25 years of production. Not because it stopped working, not because it wasn't selling, but because it didn't fit the future. To this day, some drivers swear those older two-strokes had more personality, more presence, and more punch than anything on the road today. The cult following. Why the 8V92 refuses to die. Here's the thing, you can ban it, but you can't kill it. Today, the 8V92 still lives on, in old-school buses, fire trucks, RVs, and even boats. Some people go out of their way to rescue and restore them, just to hear that unmistakable scream again. There are entire YouTube channels, Facebook groups, and forums dedicated to the Detroit two-stroke lifestyle. Guys swapping engines into custom trucks. Mechanics trading tips on how to keep them running. Owners revving them up just to hear the turbo whine and blower whir. And it's not just nostalgia. These engines are still capable. Properly tuned, an 8V92 can go toe-to-toe with modern engines in the right conditions. They can haul, climb, and keep cool under stress. Some call it obsession, others call it loyalty. One thing's for sure, there's nothing quite like a two-stroke Detroit. And for those who grew up with it, no computerized engine will ever replace that feeling. It's the difference between playing a vinyl record and listening to a Spotify playlist. One hits your soul, the other gets the job done. So, why was it really banned? The unspoken truth. Let's be honest. The official reason for the 8V92's death was emissions and noise. But unofficially, it was something deeper. The 8V92 was too independent, too simple, too easy to fix, too hard to control. Think about it. Manufacturers couldn't make money off diagnostics. Governments couldn't monitor emissions without constant testing. Big fleets couldn't justify buying new engines if the old ones wouldn't die. It didn't break down, it didn't go obsolete, it just kept running. In a world where everything is about control, tracking, regulation, and profit, engines like the 8V92 were a problem. They represented a bygone era where mechanics had freedom and engines had attitude. That's what really got it banned. Not the smoke, not the sound, but the fact that it refused to fall in line. It was too powerful, not just in torque, but in independence. Absolutely. Here's one more relevant subheading, around 250 words, that fits seamlessly into the narrative and strengthens the emotional connection to the 8V92 legacy. The sound of power. Why the 8V92's roar became iconic. For a lot of people, the Detroit 8V92 isn't just remembered for what it did. It's remembered for what it sounded like. That unmistakable high-pitched scream, mixed with the deep growl of diesel combustion, created a sound that was part banshee, part bulldozer. And it wasn't just noise, it was personality. It told you everything you needed to know. I'm here, I'm working, get out of the way. The unique sound came from its two-stroke design and the roots blower, which shoved air into the cylinders like a fire hose. Combine that with the rapid-fire firing order of an 8-cylinder engine, working every single stroke, and you get a wall of sound that could rattle your teeth. For truckers, it became a badge of honor. You could tell who was running a Detroit just by the sound echoing down a canyon highway. Fire departments and transit authorities didn't just use these engines, they announced their presence with them. Even today, videos of the 8V92 starting up or climbing a steep grade get thousands of views, not because of what it looks like, but because of how it sounds. We live in a world of quiet hybrids and silent EVs. But back then, that scream was freedom. The 8V92 didn't whisper efficiency. It shouted power. It didn't ask for permission. It demanded respect. And that sound, it's still out there. In truck shows, in restored rigs, on YouTube playlists titled Detroit Diesel Cold Starts. It's the sound of a legend that refuses to be forgotten. So now you know the truth. The Detroit 8V92 wasn't banned because it broke down or couldn't keep up. It was banned because it refused to play nice. It was loud, it was raw, it was real. And in a world chasing silence and sensors, that made it a target. It didn't go quietly. It screamed until the very end. It hauled America through its golden years, and it did it with attitude. But here's the thing about legends. You can stop building them, but you can't stop people from remembering. So if you ever hear that unmistakable two-stroke wail echoing down a lonely road or rumbling through a truck show, you'll know exactly what just passed you. The Detroit 8V92 is gone from the highways, but its roar, that still echoes. If you enjoyed this dive into diesel history, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe for more powerful engine stories, and drop a comment below with your favorite 8V92 memory, or the first time you heard one scream. Thanks for watching, and remember, real engines don't whisper, they roar.